Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Japanese Politics 101 room. Every Sunday, Timothy Langley, who runs a company in Tokyo that focuses exclusively on Japanese politics, government and public affairs, and host Pai Matsuoka bring to you the latest developments in Japanese politics. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions and opinions, so if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region. This week, our topics will be the Diet session, which took place on Wednesday, the new appointment for Foreign Minister, Mr. Kishida's new policies, and the alliances that have been created between the political parties after the 49th election. Timothy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maya. So it's been a very busy week. I'd like to bring you all up to date on what's happened. You know, in preparation for today's briefing, I looked at what we did last week, and it just strikes me as what we talked about last week was just thin and fluffy. And this week we've got real substance, and it just reminds me that every week, you know, I don't know why we haven't done this earlier, but every week in Japanese politics, probably politics around the world, every week is different. Maybe it's not true that it's all over the world, but Japanese politics is moving at a very brisk rate, and it has been over the last maybe 5 months, 4 or 5 months. You've all been tuned into what's going on, but the pace and the depth of change has really taken on an accelerated feel. So I'm really glad that you guys are plugged in and that we have this opportunity to catch up and to talk about what's going on. So you will probably have noticed that the Diet was in session, brief 3-day session after the election, after the reconfirmation of who's actually holding a Diet seat and who isn't. There were a couple of surprises. Some of the old fellows fell off. Some of the new fellows who we thought maybe might not make it because they've only been in the Diet over 3 election cycles, but they're now at their 4th election cycle. They did pretty well. Some of the political factions besides the LDP also did well, and then there were some losers. And there were also some losers within the LDP. Some of the factions did better than others, and so I'd like to catch you up to that and what that means. So it's all pretty important. So the reason why they had to have a 3-day Diet session is, first of all, they had to reconfirm who the prime minister is. Kishida was up for election, so for a period there, although he was elected as prime minister, if you don't hold a Diet seat, you're not going to be prime minister. So they had to reconfirm that, and once reconfirmed, then he announced his cabinet. So the cabinet basically resigned en masse. They held their elections. They came back from the elections, and then this 3-day Diet session was to just kickstart politics once again. So he reformed his cabinet, and it was the same cabinet. There was some speculation that he might have formed his cabinet previously in order to win the election, or alternatively to reward people who got him elected. And it seems like I think on balance, he did it mostly to reward people for him getting elected rather than building for an election strategy, because it turns out that although the LDP did well, Komeito did well, it wasn't as a consequence of different cabinet posts. It was more a reflection of the economy and COVID and the main opposition party being not very clever, it turns out. So the Diet session started, the new budget, the new cabinet is enthroned. There's only one change in the cabinet. That is the foreign minister has changed. Everybody else stays the same. And the reason why there's only been one change is because the Secretary General had to resign. Akira Amari had to resign because he didn't win his seat based on his own personal presentation. He won his seat on the fallback, which was the proportional representation, and that was seen as something of a diminution of his status, and being Secretary General, not having a resounding win, could cause trouble with him in his areas of persuasion for other LDP members in that very important role as Secretary General. So he resigned rather than waiting for Mr. Kishida to ask him to move. And then Mr. Kishida moved up Mr. Motegi, who was foreign minister, into the Secretary General's role. That was a pretty smooth move. And now he needs to put in this foreign minister. And there was a lot of, what would you call it, jockeying for position within the LDP. But Kishida was able to convince, or maybe power through, that his number two in his faction become the foreign minister. And that fellow is Hayashi. We'll talk a little bit about him later in the briefing, but it really strengthens Mr. Kishida's power within the LDP, having taken the Secretary General, who was initially sort of inserted there by Mr. Abe and Mr. Aso Taro, and that fellow fell out, so he put in somebody a little bit more of his own choosing, and so that also helps strengthen his base. So although the court is still out on Kishida, it looks like some of the things are falling in his favor. So we have a new foreign minister, Yoshimitsu Hayashi. There's an interesting story to him, his election district, and his prospects for the future in politics, potentially as prime minister. But he comes incredibly credentialed. He went to Harvard's Kennedy School of Government Affairs. He was, he's had maybe three or four ministerial portfolios. He was agriculture minister twice. He was education minister briefly. He was defense minister. And the interesting thing about that is that he received all of those ministerial portfolios while being in the upper house, not in the lower house, the rough and tumble lower house, where all the prime ministers come from. So he is a significant individual in Japanese politics, even before he changed his seat. And not only that, but he just won his seat and immediately becomes foreign minister. So that's a pretty big deal. You might recall that the fellow who hired me out of Japanese law school did the same thing. When he hired me, this is about 40 years ago, he was in the upper house. I joined his team. I worked with him. I worked with the Hosoda faction, which was at that time the Fukuda faction. And he changed house from the upper house to the lower house. And as a consequence of his win, he became foreign minister, but not immediately, not as a consequence of, but he became foreign minister pretty quickly thereafter. And everybody who does this, their bid is to become prime minister. So the timing wasn't quite right for my fellow. He never ran for prime minister. His highest position was foreign minister, and he was a long-serving foreign minister, very successful. But for Mr. Hayashi, it looks like he's starting out a little bit younger. And it looks like, yes, he will have a great run for the money. It also is interesting that he comes from the same election district as Shinzo Abe, and also Mr. Abe's younger brother, Mr. Kishi. They all come from the same election district in Yamaguchi. And the reason why that's deliciously interesting is because you might remember that the Supreme Court said there are districts in Japan that are at a state of unconstitutionality with regard to the number of population and the number of seats they have. And Yamaguchi is the district that the Supreme Court was talking about. So rather than saying it's unconstitutional, you need to fix it, they just said it seems to be in a state of unconstitutionality, giving the bureaucrats a little bit of wiggle room to fix it. So they're going to fix it in the next 2 years. So this Supreme Court ruling was about 7 years ago. So for that period of time, they haven't done anything. People are nervous about when they're going to do it. But now it's going to happen within the next 2 years. And the 4 seats that are in the district are going to be reduced to 2 seats. Mr. Hayashi holds one of those 4 seats. Mr. Abe holds one of those 4 seats. Mr. Kishi holds one of those 4 seats. Somebody's got to go. So when Mr. Kishida appointed Hayashi, you can imagine how angry that made Mr. Abe, because now Mr. Hayashi, who is far more popular in Yamaguchi than the Abe family, that's very clear. So the prospect of running against Hayashi, who was in the upper house, and he had been, education minister and agriculture minister, against Mr. Abe, who had been the longest serving prime minister. Well, I guess Mr. Abe has a good chance, but now it's a little bit different. You've got Mr. Abe, who used to be prime minister, and Mr. Hayashi, who is foreign minister in the newspaper, and he was at the latest, international confab, and that sort of thing is a daunting prospect. So either Mr. Abe or his younger brother, Mr. Kishi, who is Minister of Defense right now, somebody's got to give. So that's something that's coming up, and it kind of, I hope you appreciate the spice that it adds to this stew that we constantly go and talk about. There will be another diet session. There is required to be another diet session before the end of the year. This will have to be an extraordinary diet session, and the Prime Minister will set how many days it is. And what he needs to achieve there is, first of all, he'll make a policy statement. He will announce a fantastic supplementary budget, and then have the diet pass that supplementary budget. And it looks like it's going to be a whopper, probably trillions of yen. I think 30 trillion yen is the number that is being talked about. And in terms of real money, I have no idea how many zeros that follows behind a dollar sign. But that's a lot of money. And they've already said that this, the supplementary budget is in discussion. The details of it will be released on Thursday of this week, and it'll be kind of like a trial balloon. So it'll be floated, it'll be reported in the press, people will talk about it, and then they'll hold the diet session maybe at the end of this month, but certainly in December. And it'll be a short diet session, maybe 10 or 15 days, to pass this supplementary budget. And what it's going to focus on, we already have some ideas that it'll focus on, interestingly, startups. So you've followed, the unicorns, the number of unicorns that are in Japan, and how many, startups have been really successful, and what, finding venture capital in this country. All of these things are just, they're roadblocks to actually launching companies and creating these unicorns. And they've done research that shows, India will generate another 15 unicorns within the next 18 months, and a unicorn is just an engine. It's a fountain of generating technology and innovation and generating money. So everybody wants to have more and more unicorns. It doesn't look like there's been much action there, and the Japanese are just hopeful. Why doesn't somebody come up with a brilliant idea? Why don't we have an Einstein? Why don't we have somebody like Steve Jobs? What in the hell's wrong with you people? When everybody's saying, the tax system and the access to money and the education system and, working in a net cafe, all of these things, just stymie that. So there will be a lot of focus put on startups, helping startups, focusing on, education and access to money, that sort of thing. They'll also focus on digitization of the economy. And what they're going to do is focus on the rural areas. They're smaller, they're more adept to being managed rather than the big ones. So when they started the digital agency, we talked about this, that it was going to start in the central government, and it was going to integrate all of the ways the ministries communicate with each other. It was going to unitize the systems, the encryption, the hardware, all of that stuff. They were supposed to centralize it, and little by little filter it out from the ministries into the localities and into the rural area. This idea now that they're talking about with the supplementary budget is actually the reverse end of that. They're going to start with the rural areas, and interestingly enough, focus not just on digitization, but also on robotics and drones. So this is very aggressive. It's very forward-looking, and you would think maybe that something like that is going to start in Tokyo or Osaka. They've already got the drone paths laid out in the sky in Tokyo and Osaka, all of the neighborhoods, the distribution points. They already have that laid out. They just don't have the laws that accommodate the drones being flown and, disturbing the people or, crashing into telephone poles, that sort of thing. They haven't quite figured that out. And I think they've changed the strategy a little bit to have something a little bit more digestible, something rural. Let's try it out there. Let's see how it works. So that's a real interesting take on what the Prime Minister intends to do. And the other thing that's interesting is he's said that he will dedicate, 10 trillion, a 10 trillion yen fund to universities, to building up universities. So for many of the people in the audience who have been to a Japanese university, it's it's nothing like going to a university in England or Australia or the United States. It really is a pretty tough deal because the facilities are pretty stark, and the living accommodations. You don't have squirrels and trees on the campus and that sort of thing. It is, you really have to want to go to graduate school badly or university here in Japan, because the whole experience is significantly texturally different than elsewhere. So they're going to be devoting a lot of money to that, and hopefully that will raise the level of digital awareness and digital dexterity among the people who will be, the future technocrats. Also, with regard to policy, you can see things now. So the ideas were floated out when Kishida was talking about becoming prime minister, when they had these panels on NHK, and the candidates would talk about their areas of focus. And then he became prime minister. He talked about it a little bit more, and now it's becoming a little bit more concrete. Go-to travel, they will launch in February. I know this is something close to you, Maya. Go-to travel is an initiative by the Japanese government to subsidize people to go visit throughout the country. You get travel vouchers, you get discounts, you get funds to spend on certain parts of your travel. They said that will go in February. And in conjunction with that, everybody's heard about, going from the 10-day restrictions once you come into the country to 3 days. So they're really moving quickly. It turns out that the 3-day period where you have to be under house observation, if you submit documents and you have a company explanation, it turns out that that's just too onerous to really be very attractive to people. So although Mr. Kishida said, this is what I want to happen, the bureaucrats who are implementing that have put the brakes on it by throwing in all of these regulations and these hoops. So it has caused a little bit of a problem. You see that frequently in Japanese government, where the leader says one thing, but the bureaucrats are not so accommodating. And this is one of those examples where the government wants to go, and the bureaucrats say, yeah, we're going, but in order to do that, we have to have the papers, and you have to submit the requirements, and they've just put it on so that there was a lot of excitement this time last year that the 10 days were going to be reduced to 3. But over the brief period of a week, we have discovered what that actually means. And most people who might want to be here for an extended period of time, the prospect of being in the house for 3 days compared to 10 days is very attractive until they look at actually what that requires. The other thing that they're going to be talking about is not talking about, actually putting a lot of effort in, is the passports. The passports will be paper-based, but they will move quickly to being digital as well. And their rollout will be for Japanese nationals traveling within Japan, and probably by spring, it will include, passport travel for international travel and reciprocity as well. So they're moving very quickly on that. The other thing that they've made progress on are payouts to stimulate the economy. You will remember that there was a little bit of a discussion about this last week, where Mr. Kishida said, it wasn't really out of his mouth. It was out of the mouth of his coalition partner, Komeito, who wanted to give 100,000 yen to every person who had children under 18 years of age. This was not an idea that was supported or conceived by the LDP. This would be a tremendous drain on the economy, and they did this last year. You might remember, if you're living here in Japan, everybody received Jumaen. And the results show that it really didn't stimulate the economy as they thought it would, but it sure cost a lot. This one is a more reduced version, and there was a lot of horse trading between Komeito and the LDP. The LDP was not that enthusiastic about it, but Komeito helped them in their election. It's about time for you to scratch my back, and the first thing I want you to do is give 100,000 yen to everybody who has kids, and it will have our signature as Komeito. This is our idea. So when it comes around for the elections of the upper house, in about 7 months' time, people will remember how kind-hearted we were. The LDP put the brakes on that a bit. They accepted part of it and they declined part of it. So the way that it rolls out now is any family whose annual income is 9.6 million per year or less, and they have children under the age of 18, then they get 100,000 yen per child. So it's a bit of a watered down version. Even that watered down version doesn't please everybody, but it makes the Komeito something of a prominent figure, at least among the people who voted for them, and makes them an attractive option going into the upper house election. So that's something that will roll out. It's when you look at actually what it means that they're going to get, you know, half of it in cash within the next 5 months, and the other half following that 5 months in terms of vouchers. So you kind of wonder how exciting is that? How stimulating is that? It looks like, some people come up with a wonderful idea, and then the bureaucrats actually finagle how to actually get it done, and it turns out that it doesn't taste as good as it was originally conceived. And I think this is one of those examples. The other thing, there are two other policy issues that we can look forward to. One is that they already anticipate a sixth wave of COVID, or some derivative of COVID, hitting the archipelago in perhaps February, right in the middle of the winter. So they're already anticipating that, and they're shoring up their resources to take care of that. And one of the things that they're doing new that they hadn't been doing before, and received a lot of criticism for, was testing. So they are going to be ramping up testing, government testing, government-funded testing, make it available, accessible, easy, and cheap. And that's something that's been missing from the mix for the whole time. So they're going to change that, and they're going to bolster the devices and the space in the hospitals to accommodate what they foresee as being a sixth wave. And then finally, my number. My number is an idea that, like a social security number assigned to all people in Japan, an idea that was launched about 2.5 years ago. Interestingly enough, it came out of Mr. Amari's administration when he was working in the bureaucracy. This was a kind, maybe not his brainchild, but under his administration it came out. And it really has never taken off. Not everybody is using it. Not everybody's that enthusiastic about it. It does have some glitches to it. But what they've decided to do now is, the reason why people aren't using it, we need to encourage them. So let's give people Nimaen for applying for and getting the My Number card. And immediately, if they've signed up for it, if they've already signed up for it, or if they sign up for it now, they will get an additional Nimaen as a voucher for using that. So that tells you how important it is, and kind of what a failure it's been so far. But it's an initiative that's not going to go away. And I think they've already made a commitment on that. You see a lot of things like this in Japan, where they have it's the flavor of the month, and it's an idea that they put a lot of emphasis on, and then administrations change and it just dies. And then they do analysis about how much that fiasco cost the Japanese taxpayers. I don't think My Number is going to be that system, because in future reiterations for the Japanese to run their economy and to be really on top of what's going on in this country, as they want to do, as they're compelled to do, they will have to have some sort of a numbering system to be able to do that. So I think that one's good to go. Let me talk a little bit about the fallout from the elections, who won and who lost. So clearly, Mr. Kishida's faction now is, the faction of the prime minister, and also the faction of the foreign minister. So he won pretty big there. He still has to accommodate the Hosoda faction, the Abe faction, and also the Aso faction, which are the two most influential ones who got him elected in the first place. The Abe faction has gone through a bit of a change. In fact, has become a little bit more powerful, in that the faction, the name of the faction was the Hosoda faction, or the Seiwakai Kenkyukai. And now the leader, the titular head of that, Mr. Hosoda, has been appointed in the new Diet session with the change of the cabinet and the reassertion of Mr. Kishida as prime minister. The Speaker of the House has also been replaced, and the new Speaker of the House is Mr. Hosoda, which is pretty interesting. So that really enhances the Hosoda faction. But in order to become the Speaker of the House, which is the highest position within the lower house, you have to resign your party affiliation. So he has to give up his position as the faction head of the Hosoda faction. And in a brief ceremony, I think it was on Thursday, Mr. Abe became the head of the Hosoda faction. So the Hosoda faction will no longer be called the Hosoda faction, and I think there is a reversion back to the Seiwakai terminology. This faction is the largest faction by far in the Diet, and both in the upper house and in the lower house. It's a faction that was produced by a prime minister, Mr. Fukuda, and after he became prime minister, he launched this faction. And this faction was immediately very popular, very charismatic, and it's produced 4 prime ministers since that time. So now we have Mr. Abe and the largest faction and the former head of the the Hosoda faction, now the Speaker of the House. So you can see that there's a tremendous buildup here. Who are the losers? Clearly, the loser was the faction headed by Ishihara Nobuteru, who is a pretty famous guy. Basically, his father was very famous, and his uncle was very famous. His father was governor of Tokyo and a very, very outspoken author and critic, and he was a real firebrand. And this is his son, who's kind of taken over his reins. And his uncle was like the Elvis Presley of Japan. He died early in his career, but he was by far the most famous and most loved singer and actor in late Showa. Everybody knows him, and I think as a consequence of that, his brother became a very famous actor and not actor, I'm sorry, author. And so that political dynasty continues. Anyway, Mr. Ishihara lost his seat in this last election, and he was the head of the Ishihara faction. So that's pretty demeaning. He's resigned as the head of that faction. The faction itself was one of the smallest. It has 7 members. So now these 7 members are kind of loaning, somewhat leaderless. They are in discussions now. Should one of us be the leader now, and maybe we change the name, or do we just kind of scatter to the wind and ask other factions to accept us as their new leader? And the other factions are arms open. If we can increase our faction by 1 or 2 people, we're really good for that. And if you want some commitments, if you want some, promises to help you in that decision, we're very welcome to get into that kind of a discussion with you. So it looks like the Ishihara faction might dissolve because the attractiveness of expanding your base. Hosoda faction, the Abe faction now, is by far the largest. Number 2 and number 3 are kind of neck and neck. And so the battle between the factions is going to continue. So the idea is, if you're looking for a place to go because you're an independent and you want to prepare for the next election, or you want to make sure that your position is very secure, you can be attracted by several different arguments. One argument is, why don't you join the faction that is the largest? And because we're the largest, we wield the most influence. And so you might have a committee seat, you might have a seat at one of the issues that you feel very strongly about that will help promote your career. But also, because we're the largest, we also get the largest number of ministerial portfolios when there's a change in the government or when there's a change in the cabinet. Alternatively, you could join a party, and the argument would be, why don't you join the party that has the Secretary General within the ranks? So the Secretary General is the person who decides what election districts candidates will run in, including your position, and also how much money the LDP will give you to help you win your election. So do you want to be in that party? And then the other faction is they all have their own arguments. So we're the number two largest party. Don't you want to join us? That sort of thing. So there is a lot of jockeying that's going on. It will be like this for a couple of months, and then pretty soon things will settle down and people start preparing for the upper house election. And I'm trying to wrap up here. There are a couple of things that we also have to talk about that have been important and kind of defined, or at least indicated in this last week since we talked the last time. And one of those is Japan's stance towards China. So initially, Japan was perceived as being rather hawkish on China, particularly with regard to some of the provocative actions that they've taken, like sailing through the straits in a flotilla with the Russian Navy destroyers and warships, and also the provocations with Taiwan and threatening, the sea lanes that Japan really depends on. So the selection of Mr. Hayashi as foreign minister is somewhat instructive. Many people see him as a panda hugger, that he loves China, and that this is a signal of somewhat acquiescence. He was the leader of the, there's a group, maybe the Japan-China Parliamentary or Friendship League. He was the leader of that. And since he became foreign minister, he gave that up because there was some criticism that because of that, he's going to be soft on China. And he was on an interview just this week to address that. And I don't think he would be considered to be soft on China. I think he'd actually be considered to be a little bit more hawkish, just because he knows so much. He's been engaged with China for so long. But, we'll see. But you've got Mr. Kishi, who is the defense minister. He's rather hawkish. And the prime minister also appointed a fairly influential member of the parliament, Nakatani Gan, who was formerly a defense minister. He's appointed him as a special advisor on human rights, which it means China's treatment of the Uyghurs and their record on human rights, that sort of thing. So it does look like he's placing into position a group of people who are maybe not like-minded, but are slanting towards building some sort of a bulwark towards dealing with China. And I think it's more on the hawkish side than on the dovish side. That will come up in the next. It will be revealed to us in the next couple of months. But I think clearly Japan is beginning to refine their stance. If before the election or during the election, Japan was considered as hawkish on China, I think that trend will continue. The theme of being wary and needing to bolster defense and increase defense spending. As a consequence of that, I think that pattern, that path has been set for us, and I think we will continue to go on that. Also, the prime minister has set up a couple of new panels. These are expert panels. Some of them he sits on that will tell us where his real interests lie. And let me just identify four of them that are coming up pretty strong. They consist of members of the government, academia, and the bureaucracy. One is the Digital Garden City State Initiative. It consists of four subpanels, and in conjunction with the digital agency and all of the other areas of the Japanese economy that is going digital, they're putting a lot of emphasis on this, separate from what the bureaucrats are doing. This is kind of like a leadership meeting. And with digitization of society, I mean, I belong to the American Chamber of Commerce, and even within that business group, there are like 4 or 5 different committees dealing with different aspects of digitization. So it's very broad, and each of those different sections are very deep. Some of them, there's a lot of bleeding over, and the prime minister is finding the same thing with digitization. But you can see that digitization of the economy and of Japanese society is moving forward. Typically in Japan, it doesn't move that fast. You don't really see the fruits of it, but I think the pieces are in place, and it's something that everybody needs to be aware of. And probably the Japanese economy will begin to reveal that very shortly. You know, the Japanese government, the digital agency, just signed an agreement with AWS, Amazon Web Services, and also Google as their provider for cloud services. This is a very big deal. They tried to do it with a local provider. They couldn't do it. They went to best in the field, worldwide, access, Google and AWS. And so they've signed that contract. So I think you'll start seeing a real reiteration of this initiative. The second one is the Social Security for All Generations panel. So that means it also includes a touch of the My Number system, but defining what the Social Security is going to be and how it's going to be funded and how it's going to be utilized is an area of top concern with the Prime Minister. The third one is raising wages for nurses, workers for the elderly, daycare workers, that sort of thing, and for kindergartens and nurseries. So they're trying to crank up the number of people who are having children, and they figure that one of the ways of doing that is having better nurseries, having better kindergartens, better daycare, but also on the other end of the spectrum, people who are at the end of their life, who are living alone or in assisted living. We've been all over the block on this, trying to import, Filipinas who have nursing experience to come in and help with that. That didn't work very well. It's still a process that's ongoing, but the Japanese government definitely needs to do something on both ends of the spectrum, and it looks like this is one of the panels he's focusing on. And finally, another big one is a panel on the new form of capitalism, realization. So this is a panel he's actually personally sitting on to create this new form of capitalism. Who in the hell knows what that is, but we can kind of define it by pronouncements that he's made and ideas that he has espoused. And the primary among those is we need to increase the wages. We need to have people earn more money so that they can spend more money and that the economy will, revive itself. And the tension there is, where is this money going to come from? Is it going to come from the government, or is it going to come from the corporations selling more and doing more? And his idea, I guess, the panel is working on it, is that the companies are going to pay it. The companies will pay higher wages, and when they do that, they will get certain subsidies or certain benefits from the Japanese government, but pay more salaries first. So there's that tension of paying people more money who deserve higher wages. Because the lack of inflation here, salaries have been stagnant for 15, 20 years. So it's really tough. The people who are getting money, who are in bonds, stocks, real estate, there is a wealthy class that is getting wealthier, but it's not a broad-based economic development as was initially envisioned by Abe's 4 arrows. And so finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about this new political field that we're playing in. So it was previously, the LDP and Komeito, they had a kind of lock-on politics. Under Mr. Abe, they had a great push, not quite enormous, for a revision of the Constitution. It was a dream of Mr. Abe, not quite realized. But that dynamic has changed quite a bit with the tremendous success that Isshin no Kai has had. Isshin no Kai is a political party that was formed in Osaka. It's spread gradually out in the region around Osaka, Kyoto, Hyogo-ken, but it also has made inroads here in Tokyo as well. They went from 10 members to 41 members. And that they were the hugest winners proportionally of all of the parties that were involved in the election. So they're really doing well now, and they've decided to come into some sort of a coalition with the Democratic Party for the People, which is a small, it's always been a small political party trying to establish itself, trying to distinguish itself from people who are like it. So the most popular, the largest opposition party was the Constitutional Democratic Party, which did miserably in the election. The reason why they did miserably was because one of their strategies was to criticize the LDP for their failure on COVID and on the economy. So it was just kind of, a critical, these guys aren't doing a good job, so let us do it because these are our ideas kind of strategy. And the second thing that they did that kind of knocked their knees out was that they formed a kind of an arrangement with the Communist Party that in those districts that you are not running a candidate because you don't have enough candidates, you don't have enough funding for that, and we're running one, your voters will support us. And in other districts where we feel your candidate, we'll just make a kind of horse trade so that you get more seats at the end of the day than you normally would have because of our support, and you do the same for us. That dream was never realized, and it actually worked to diminish both of them. So the Japanese Communist Party has a 3.9% approval rate, and the Constitutional Democratic Party has a 10%. On the other hand, the Ishin no Kai, they have a 13% approval rate. And in light of that, when they did polls, they asked people, so you've got the LDP and Komeito on one end, and you've got the Constitutional Democratic Party on the other hand. This is before the election happened. And wouldn't you like to see the Constitutional Democratic Party being a real force for making a balanced government? Or would you like to see a third force emerge? And they were surprised by the results because, let me see, what was the number? It was like 52% of the people polled said, I'd like to see a third force emerge. So taking that to its logical conclusion, Ishin no Kai is setting up a somewhat of a coalition of sorts with the Democratic Party for the People. The Democratic Party of the People has approximately 11 members now, and Ishin no Kai has 41 members. The magic number to submit bills to the parliament is 50. So if they form something of a coalition, not a merger of their parties, but something of a coalition, they have enough to begin submitting bills to the Diet. This is a big deal. And if they were to submit bills to the Diet, their first issue is revision of the Constitution. So that's huge. So that's huge for them. They can submit bills like that. It establishes what their philosophy and their kind of concept is of Japanese politics. The Ishin no Kai is very dismissive of current Japanese politics and current Japanese politicians. One of the areas they want to promote is a reduction of 20% of politicians' salaries. So that's not going to make them very popular, but it's something that they're hanging their hat on because they think it will appeal to the voters. So now their idea of having a look at the Constitution, the LDP is looking at that and saying, hey, these guys might be good bedfellows. So in order to change the Constitution, everybody already knows this, it requires a supermajority in the upper house, a supermajority in the lower house to pass a bill to revise the Constitution. That bill then goes to a referendum of all people in Japan. And of the people who vote, not everybody's going to vote, of the people who vote, if 51% say, yeah, this revision, this study of revising the Constitution meets our approval, then they can move forward on it. So if there is a coalition with Komeito and the LDP, they already have 294 of the 465 seats. Sorry about that. The numbers, they just are somewhat confusing. But in order to pass that referendum, you need to have 310 members. So the LDP and the Komeito have 294 right now, not enough to pass a referendum in the lower house. However, if Ishin and JPP come together, they have far more than that. They have 346 when you only need 310 votes for a constitutional revision. So now you begin to sense the excitement of the largest faction in the Diet, the Abe faction, and his dream of revising the Constitution, and this sudden comeuppance of Ishin no Kai and their idea with another minor party to come up with this idea of revising the Constitution. Now you can see that people are beginning to rub their hands together. So between now and the election for the upper house, you can see a lot of movement going towards that, and possibly, because it kind of works in terms of psychology, possibly a referendum being proposed before the upper house election, and then the upper house election happening, and then whoever promoted the idea for the referendum saying, well, since we won really well in the upper house, it is kind of an endorsement, so we're going to move forward on that. So once again, this tumbling down the hill of how these initiatives go from a concept to a challenge to making some progress forward to actually reaching fruition. That's what we're in right now, and I think you're going to see a lot of that coming up in the next 7 or 8 months. So with that, I've been going on now for a lot longer than I normally do, but it's just been an incredibly busy week. I really appreciate everybody listening in on the room, on the briefing. I'd like to open it up for your comments and suggestions, and please join us next week. Every week is different. Every week is so exciting. I'm really so grateful that that I've got this audience and so many people, Japan hands, who are interested in exchanging views. Thank you very much. Maya?
Thank you, Timothy. Are there any policies which are being made to address the shortage of labor and the structural problem there?
Well, yeah, that's, it's always the problem, because even if the people have more children, it's 20 years before they're kind of up to speed for joining the workforce. So the other idea that has been tried and has failed is bringing in more foreign workers. And that hasn't been a very successful venture. So how about the people who are retiring and they still have a good lifespan? You just because you're 60 or 63 or 65 years old, there's still plenty of juice left in the tank. Perhaps could these individuals contribute to for some of these people who have been working all their lives and been in a company, or a small company or large company, to now be taking care of elderly and bedridden people? I think that would be a bit of a stretch.
Tomoko, good morning.
Good morning. I have several questions, so I don't want to disturb other people's questions. So if I'm asking too much, just let me know. One question is that the new capitalism thing related to
Okay, that's enough.
digital something, digital 田園調布? The Kishida is already, Kishida's new committee of the digitalization thingy. Because Mr. Kishida has been discussing about the new capitalism, yet he actually fired Mr. Takenaka to be a member of the committee from his advisory board. Yet for the digital something, digital DNHOF or something like that, he actually appointed Mr. Takenaka to be a member of the committee. So I'm wondering, how far are we still talking about the trickle down thingy? Is my first question. And the second question is that the last night or this morning, there's a news stating that the ex-Komeito vice minister of finance, I think, will be prosecuted for the wrongdoing. Do you think something between the relationship between LGP and the Komeito might be going some issues on these kind of scandals? And well, I'll stop for now.
Okay, thank you very much. I have not heard this story that you've just relayed about somebody being under investigation or being arrested. Could you elaborate a little bit more about that?
He's being investigated to the refer for the Nihon something Koko for the loan, and he was receiving the kickback from the receiver who asked for the loan from the, let me check, 日本政策金融高校.
Yeah.
He was supposed to be doing any referrals or any it's not registered to be a money lender.
Right.
So that is really it was under investigation, and prosecutor seems to be decided to prosecute.
Okay. Yes, I know that story. Right. So this is the organization that you're talking about is so if you have a company in Japan, it's easy for you to apply for a loan, and these are like low interest rate loans that are relatively easy to get, in small increments, and maybe 5 million or less than 10 million yen increments. So it really helps the small and medium companies get a little bit more of a boost. And what this individual was doing was filtering and cajoling companies to make the applications and also to secure the loans, and getting a little bit of a sweetness as a consequence of that. I think the underlying question you had was, do these kinds of things influence the Komeito LDP relationship? And as your
Yes,
question,
nothing more, just the relationship between LGP and Komeito. I don't want to ask any further.
okay, and it does, because the Komeito is extremely sensitive to these kinds of money politics and the dirtiness, because we're the clean party. We are the party that stands for the normal people, and the LDP. We're in a coalition with you, but God damn it, you guys, you're always about money and you're always about big business and you never want to help the small people. We're in a coalition with you, so you have to do it like this. So they are very sensitive to that. So the interesting part about the Ishin no Kai and the Democratic Party for the People, this emergence here, is that, yeah, maybe the LDP could, do a little bit of trading here. Komeito, if you're not willing to kind of play our game, there are other suitors here. So that's an interesting dynamic that's only come up as a consequence of this last election. I hope that responds somewhat, Tomoko.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
And then your other question was about Takinaka-san, right?
Yes, just give.
Yeah. So
We're still talking of the trickle down, which Takenaka was really strongly state.
proponent.
It never
Yes.
happened.
Yeah, so Takinaka-san was he was actually a minister portfolio without being a Diet member in the Koizumi administration. he wielded a lot of power on economic policy, and I think what we have seen, not only in the United States but also here in Japan, because Japan typically follows the lead of the United States on some of these ideas that seem to be really well thought out and reasoned, and they adopt it without actually running their own due diligence. They kind of piggyback on what the United States is doing, and they follow it very closely. But I think the evidence is that trickle down just doesn't work. The rich just keep getting richer. The corporations hoard the money and they stuff it into their bank accounts for a rainy day. But it doesn't materialize into higher wages, or it does sometimes result in other investments. But those other investments only benefit the corporation. So the corporation might buy more cars. They might have more golf memberships for their executives and that sort of thing. But it doesn't really trickle down. And I think they've found that to be the case in several European economies as well.
Are we still talking about Takenaka? Because new capitalism is supposed to be something different from Mr. Takenaka was really claiming, or
Exactly.
is
Yeah.
claiming. And that's why we believed Takenaka was actually had to leave from the advisory board. But yet, Mr. Takenaka was appointed again for the different division, but also is very much involved with the some kind of capitalism. So just I'm wondering, Mr. Kishida's new capitalism, is the rather still talking about the old capitalism or what?
It remains to be seen, because a lot of people are unclear about what his new capitalism means, and that's why he's put this panel together in which he is sitting, because he's trying to define it too. He's getting pushback from the bureaucrats, as we discussed earlier, that the bureaucrats say, look, if you want to distribute more money, if you want the corporations to act in that way, you've got to bolster the money supply, you've got to bolster the economy first, and then pay out. And Mr. Kishida is saying, no, let's pay out, let's get the economy going, let's give people higher wages, and as a consequence of that, the economy will bloom. And so he has that controversy that he's got to deal with.
The last question I really wanted to ask you today is COP26 issue. Because how much affect Japanese economy? Because Japanese economy is recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, and COVID-19 is just managed to sign the agreement. So I'm wondering the outcome of the COVID-26 will affect Japanese economy from today to years.
That's a great question. You're talking about COP, right? The environmental impact on the world economy, right?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yes.
Everybody and their brother went to Glasgow for the World Climate Summit, And there were commitments made and promises about what we're going to do with the carbon footprint and generation of electricity and carbon, the dependence on, carbon fuels and that sort of thing. The commitments that are made are always long term. By 2050, we'll be zero carbon, will be carbon neutral in certain industries. We're going to go from gasoline powered internal combustion engines to completely electric. That didn't go very well with Toyota. Although there are pronouncements that are made for in the future for future administrations can deal with them in a way that they want, even in light of some of the commitments they make in international venue. But the commitments that were made are very aggressive. Going to renewable energy fields, even though geothermal, wind power, wave power, in fact, are still just small percentages. They're still trying to decide what they're going to do about nuclear. And if you want to reduce your carbon footprint in current technology, the best way to go is nuclear. So some of the people are thinking that the best way out of this is to focus on generating nuclear energy, but fixing, how it is done, how it is produced. And the second way is still relying on coal, but focusing on how to produce coal in a clean way so that the carbon is captured and stored somehow. I don't know if that responds adequately. It's somewhat out of my field, but there might be some other people who are more familiar in the room that might have some insight on that. So I'm sorry my responses are not very satisfying, but
I just wonder whether are we going to receive witnessing a new tax? It's one of my
yes.
questions. Although the Ministry of Environment just seems to decide not to introduce next year.
Yes.
The minister kept telling that we need to have the new taxation, although we have so many different, hukkoze and so on and so on. And we are supposed to be getting more income. The increase of tax is much higher. So I'm just wondering what is going on.
Oh yeah, the United States is going to face the same situation with the trillions of dollars in the new budget under the Biden administration. How you're going to pay for that? And I think the response of the Biden administration is it's not going to cost you a single penny. But what they're doing in reaction to that is just producing more money, printing more money, which of course causes inflation. In Japan, yes, I think that there will be a carbon tax. And the first part of that is trying to measure and calculate how much carbon is used to produce whatever. And Google and AWS have already gone through a very thorough analysis, and they publish it on their webpage, that in producing our iPhone, we are almost carbon neutral. On the iPads, we're almost carbon neutral. We're going to be carbon neutral in 5 years. And the way they do that is they purchase carbon credits from other countries so that on balance they become carbon neutral. But I think definitely it's starting with the bigger corporations. And once they get the technology down, I know that there are several companies that are focused on measuring the amount of carbon output so that you can use that in your advertisements about, buy our product because we are more gentle to the environment than our competitors and that sort of thing. So I think definitely we're going in that direction.
So we are going to buy the products much higher prices than before, and we may be receiving the new taxation, although we are already paying the renewable energy cost, something for on top of our electricity and so on and so on. Okay, that's fine. And regarding the American budget, I'm sure the government is going to collect money from Mr. Elon Musk.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we got to get those billionaires because, as Mr. Biden said, pay your fair share.
Well, he paid his share just because to pay the tax.
Well, that's how things are.
And the rich people are supposed to pay the tax anyway. He was avoiding paying the tax.
Yeah, I think the rich are just a convenient target, but analysis has already shown that the rich, the wealthy, are paying the largest burden of taxes anyway, at least in the United States. So I think they're going to run into some real serious problems in the United States.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tomoko.
Thank you, Yuka. Hello.
Hi, Maya and Timothy. Oh, I love listening to you, Timothy. I just have to. I'm sorry. I'm sort of like a, so like the word that you're using is so colorful. I mean, like I never heard the term. Like a what? What was the one? Like a rough and tumble. I think I might have heard, but like a panda huggers. Like that was a new one for me. So thank you so much. I'm building, the knowledge on Japanese politics and vocabulary. Now, on a more serious note,
Yes, I make these words up in
as
anticipation
you
of these
go.
briefings. Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm going back to the subsidy. Do you call it a subsidy, like a distribution for the COVID, the cash, the check?
Yes.
Okay, so like 100,000 yen to folks with the kids of 18 years old or younger. Now, you said that there's an income requirement. My understanding was that's the up for a debate, right?
It was heatedly debated, and that debate was settled this week.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that are important. Every week something new is happening and decisions are made. So there was a decision. Komeito came in and they said we want this COVID subsidy to go to the people who are raising children. They need that. And the LDP was not very favorable to it. The Ministry of Finance was not very favorable to it. But as a consolation to Komeito, they said, okay, we'll do it, but it's got certain requirements to it. And then they established that not everybody's going to get it because a lot of people were without kids or who had kids that were over 18 years old are looking at this and saying, hey, why the hell do they get it and we don't? So they knocked it down as a kind of a means-based test. Anybody who is making 9.4 million per year will be qualified for it, but anybody who's making more than that does not qualify.
Wait. So see, that sounds very high to me. It's like almost $1 million a year, right? Wait, am I wrong? Wait. I'm sorry. In US dollars, it's 100,000 a year, right? Am I not right? Anyway, actually, I'm not. Actually, my question is not on this. The income requirement. Actually, my question is, the Nikkei newspaper. They did their own polling or survey, and then according to them, like almost 65% of Japanese citizens are against this subsidy. I think it's because the reason is the first go around, the money went into their savings, not to the
That's
direct
right.
consumption.
That's right.
So now my question is, why then the Komeito are still insisting on going ahead with this? So that's why my question to you, Timothy, is like, is Komeito supporters a little bit like what is different demographics
Yes.
compared to LDP supporters?
Absolutely. So it's a political thing. The Komeito wants to be the party of the people, and we are kinder and gentler than the LDP. And this is all geared towards the upper house election. So the Komeito, they did relatively well in the lower house election, and they want to enhance their possibilities of getting more upper house seats in the next election. So in order to do that, they're appealing to the voters, even those voters, the vast majority of them, who are on the lower brackets of income. So the LDP typically is for the businessmen, for business owners, for people who are relatively well off. And Komeito is more appealing to the people who are actually suffering. They have kids. They're trying to get their kids educated. They're suffering from taxes and that sort of thing. So I think it's a not a ploy, but it's kind of a tactic to be more appealing to those people when the upper house election comes. I think that's pretty clear that you can see that.
So like if I can use like a comparison to US, like a Komeito is that, are they more similar to Democrats in the US? Or
Yes,
this is
that's true.
okay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thank you. Maya, I have a housekeeping question.
Yes.
So now we're heading into the holidays. Are you going to keep this room throughout the rest of the year?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
I'm required to show up on Sundays.
Sorry, if you have any complaints, you can address them to the management.
They don't seem to make any difference.
Well, we have to try harder.
Yeah. What number is this for us?
This is the 40th.
This is our 40th anniversary. So 40 weeks consecutively, we have held this briefing. And I think, comments like yours really encourage me. The number of people who participate and also come up on to the platform to make comments is so encouraging, because the quality and the level of discussion just continues to increase. And I think it's an important role for us to actually discuss Japanese politics, especially the slant that I take on it, which is talking about politics that is meaningful for the people who are actually observing. What does it mean for foreign companies that are doing business here? What does it mean for people who are living here, who deal with trade and investment and diplomacy? So it's not really a deep dive as some of my briefings are for clients, but it's more like trying to keep people up to speed on what's going on and why it's important, and what's the progeny, why are we here, what happened to get us here, and what does that mean, how can you plan for the future, the immediate future, in the next 5 or 6 months, what's going to happen. And I think that's really important, and you just need to be tuned up on a regular basis on what's going on if you're advising your clients, or you're working in a company, or you're running a company, on what to anticipate. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And my new word is progeny. Okay, I'm gonna write that down. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuka. We have been thinking about doing maybe 1 or 2 deep dive rooms. One of them on the Constitution,
yeah.
the history of the Constitution in Japan, and maybe another one, if there is interest in it. It could be, about the elections, how they happen, the lower and upper house elections.
Oh, you have my big vote. However small that may be, but you have my vote. Yes, thank you. Yes, especially the first one. I really like to learn about the election and why it has not been changed for 6 years, maybe longer. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tomoko, Yuka, if you have any other questions, please go ahead now.
One thing I can give you the comment is that you are wrong about Mr. Ishihara's family. So I send a message so that you can read through and do some your own homework so that you can understand the difference.
Yes, you wrote to me and you said that Shinji, the younger brother, is the movie star.
Yes.
And you mentioned that the reason why he became such a famous movie star was because his older brother was writing these stories and using his brother as kind of the main character, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the film is based on the Mr. Shinji of the older brother's book, won the prize of I can't remember which one.
Arisawa, what was the name of the book award? Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. Anyway, one of the 2 big names for the award for the author or books. So that's Akutagawa.
Right.
Akutagawa show. Yeah. Without his help, anyway, he couldn't manage to become the big one. That's why he's been helping the Ishihara family's election, actually. So
yeah. Second, and as a fashion maven, and just somebody that was admired widely through Japanese culture, and I mean his impact was so huge. It's so unfortunate that he died so young, but also the family is very well known as avid sailors too. So they have something to do with the current hobby that I'm pursuing as well.
you're absolutely right.
Thank you. Okay, and we've got Luke. Luke, good morning.
Hello, Luke. Welcome to the group.
It's really interesting. Thank you. My question is, I was reading an article actually this morning from the Asahi newspaper about the city in Tokyo. I think it's Mashino. Their mayor has decided that, or they're putting through that foreign residents that are living in that city of Tokyo.
Right, they get to vote.
Yes, I was like, oh wow, that's for me that I've lived here for like 22 years, so it was pretty. It was an eye opener, and I think just how is that going to? I mean, it's a very small city, of course. It's in Tokyo, of course, and at the state level or the Tokyo level and the federal level, how will that be sort of viewed as a? Will they be that outgrowing nail that will be stamped or hammered, or will it be embraced?
There are a couple of things that are going on there, Luke. One is the Tokyo governor is committed to making Tokyo a financial hub, taking away some of the shine that Singapore has, as you know, all of the regional headquarters of the major corporations in the world are in Singapore, and fewer of them are in Japan. And one of the reasons for that is, um, first of all, the language in Singapore is English, um, and just the location. It's more central to the other areas of Asia than Japan is, and plus Japan is it's far more difficult to live in. The learning curve, coming up to speed and bringing your family here and getting your kids educated and sending your executives here is always been a challenge. It continues to be a challenge. So it's not a in terms of notoriety, it's great to be posted in Japan, but for many foreign executives, it's it's not an attractive place to live for 3 years, be posted here for 3 years, and then move on to your next post, because it takes 2 or 3 years just to even become effective, and you're never going to learn the language in the first place. So you've got that. The other problem is that for Japan to be really a financial hub, it needs to be a 24-hour city. So there is an initiative that are being considered of running the trains 24 hours, of running all of the services 24 hours. That's a little bit more distant in the future. But the other idea is, you've got the Carlos Ghosn saga that scares a lot of executives, that should they be here and arrested in Japan, that the kind of way that prosecutorial initiatives are run here, place executives at a real disadvantage. Not only that, but the inheritance tax and the way that you can transfer money into and out of Japan. But this idea of the city of Machida for including the foreigners, a lot of foreigners say, I pay taxes just like the Japanese, and I have no voice in elections or in what's going on.
Um,
I think it's kind of a good idea, but I mean, many people who come here who are full-time residents, and they live here and they work in the companies, are really uninterested in Japanese politics. It doesn't really impact them. So I think it's an experiment that will be watched very closely. It could take on an initiative, but even the number of foreigners who live here and contribute to the Japanese economy, it's such a small percentage. I don't know if it'll take on much of an initiative.
sorry, that's not Machida, but Musashino is the city.
Sorry, you're right, Musashino.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks for thanks for that. Yeah, I can see that these things are really not superficial, right? There's always something in the background going on, and yeah, I mean, well, 22 years I've been paying a lot of taxes, and there's a lot I do get back from Japan, so I'm not complaining. If it was unhappy, I wouldn't be here. But on the political level, yeah, I can see. I can see what you're saying about certainly the economic zones or the business zones that maybe want to try and create to allow foreign investment and to say, look, we'll give you a say in the politics that's going to happen if you are here. And not even a lot of Japanese vote. I mean, you're looking at turnout of what, 52, 53%.
That's right. Yeah.
And then you take a small percentage of the foreigners here and say, hey, we're going to allow you to vote. Well, yeah, I'll put my say in. I think that's kind of like a democratic right that people should have. So if foreigners are going to be given the ability to vote, I definitely will. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting though in Australia, because I've lived out of the country for more than 4 years. I can't vote even in my own country, so it's kind of interesting. But I saw that as an interesting development. But as far as attracting foreigners to foreign companies to invest in Japan because you're able to vote, I think it's a little bit weak. I think they need to do a little bit better than that.
Well, listen, Luke, since you brought it up, let me tag that issue as something I can talk about a little bit in our next briefing. Give me a chance to look into it and see, what is coming out of that, and what kind of reaction the press is giving to it.
Yeah, sure. I'd be interested, only for the fact that that it impacts somewhere. Like there's always something going on, and I think more the merrier as far as voting and saying, okay, this is what I believe in. But then the next step is, I always think, okay, well, if you're going to vote for someone, want to know what their policies are or what they stand for.
Then it's just one more investment of time and energy into something that you benefit so little from. And also there's this sentiment here that most foreigners feel, that you're kind of welcome to a degree, but you're not really included in a lot of things in culture and politics, because you're here to help enrich Japanese economy. I mean, even when you're applying for a visa, one of the qualifications are, what do you bring into Japan that we don't already have? How are you enhancing why should we give you a visa to work here and bring your technology or your finance or acumen or whatever? There's always that tension that's here, and it's not really too much under the surface, because there's a large portion of the Japanese population that is just very insular. It remains to be insular, and it just is a bit of a burden for foreigners to want to raise a family, buy a house, stay here long term.
Yeah, no, look, I can understand what you're saying there, and on a political level, to try and keep it, compacted. I think if they want to they have to take it that next step, right? If you're going to say that we're going to allow you to vote, well, then what are they going to do for creating that English media or
Right.
to back that up? It goes a little bit wider than the repercussions there, because I think it's not about voting; it's about what other what other rights does that give, other than just marking a piece of paper and putting it into a box?
Well, also consider the politician who is promoting this, and how that is perceived by the voters in their district. So you're promoting to have foreigners that live in our community to also have the vote, and I'm kind of ambivalent about that. But shouldn't you be spending time on issues that are more important to me, your constituent, rather than giving the right of voting to foreigners? Aren't there other issues that are more important? Why are you spending time on that? So you would invite the ire of a certain portion of your constituency too.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And then therefore, it goes back to what your original comment was, and I think it shows a very deep understanding of what's going on. It's like, okay, yeah, we're able to give foreigners something that, or the community of foreigners that are here, that have been here for a long time, or I think it was even 3 months was the timeline that they said that this might start at. And I'm just like, wow, someone that's been here for 3 months, you're going to give them the right to vote. Well, that's pretty revolutionary, but what is working in the background? But yeah, I know that there was just an interesting political.
No, it's a good question. It's a good observation. Why would you want to give the foreigners the right to vote? Aren't they just supposed to be here for a limited period of time and then go back to their home country after they've, trained Japanese staff to assume their role and their positions and their technology, and then, enrich the Japanese population? And we've seen that happen during the bubble years, and then we had the crash, the Lehman shock, and many of the foreigners left Japan, left the big houses that they occupied, and we really haven't recovered from that diminution. The areas where the foreigners collect, like in Azabu or the Tokyo American Club, have all suffered from that lack of interest internationally for the foreign executives to come to Japan. So it's a real long-term issue.
Can I say one thing? It's not issue of the foreigner, the expats or those people who are temporarily in Japan, but issues in South Korea and North Korea and Chinese people. That's the issue we've been discussing rather more, because it's the portion of the North South Korean people and
You're
Chinese people
absolutely
living
right.
permanently. That's the issue people are
You're
seeing
right.
as a voter, or shouldn't be included, excluded. It just depends on which position you're taking. And also, as Timothy long time ago discussed about the issue in Japan, we have the issue of the spy or espionage thingy. And couple of days ago, North Korean, I think 2 North Koreans
Yep.
were arrested for the act of spy. So,
Actually, they were South Korean.
oh, South Korea.
They
Okay,
were
so
they were South Korean, and they were their source was the North Korean fellow.
okay. Well,
To yeah,
if you know anything about Minzuk Dantai by South Korea, the majority of them are ex-North Korean.
that's right. So
Yes.
you've brought up a really terrific point. So when people think of the foreigners that live in Japan, the people that I think a lot of people think about the foreigners or they think about expats and the white guys who come in from Europe and the United States. They are far, far outnumbered by Koreans, South Koreans, and North Koreans who live here, and also Chinese. The Europeans, the Americans, they are such a small minority of the total population of foreigners who live here on visas or long-term residence.
It's a good point to bring up, Tomoko. And I mean, the article that was there kind of didn't dissect the foreign residents, but you are correct. It's a good point to bring up about the other minorities and how their vote will go. But yeah, thanks for bringing it up, and thanks for your comments, Tim.
Sure. As much, I don't think the word animosity is the right word, but for as much of the sentiment that the Japanese typically feel towards foreigners in general, there's a preference for the Europeans, the whites, the guys that are bringing in the money from the major economies. But there is a distinct not animosity, but a negative bent towards the others, right? And I think that's where a lot of the tension lies, as Tomoko was pointing out.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Maya.
We'll see you next Sunday. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Maya. Thanks, everybody.
Very much.
This was Japan Expert Insights Room on Japanese politics. Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next Sunday at 8:30 in the morning, Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and enjoy every day as much as possible. See you.